Works of the 16th century scholar Paracelsus. He gives us, by far, the most complete picture. Throughout his writings, he describes a great variety of homunculi and practices surrounding them. Some of the ideas appear to be very sporadic and at times even contradictory, but he does provide a useful taxonomy, particularly in his works De Homunculus et Monstris, Vom Leben, and De Natura Rerum. According to him, there are three primary types of homunculi. First, we have the more innocuous magical homunculus, which is more of a symbol than anything. He describes it as a doll or a mommet made from earth, wax, or metal as a simulacra of a living person. It can then be used magically to protect or harm that person, much like a voodoo doll. There is a variety of applications for this, but suffice it to say he saw this as a very spiritual thing, a good way to manipulate one's own soul in the physical space. Next, more in line with preformation theory and more mythological sounding by a mile, we have the pathological homunculus. These are monsters. Think of a basilisk or a cockatrice and you're on the right track. They're produced through what Paracelsus viewed as an unnatural or impure exposure of human seed. Essentially, if it ends up anywhere other than the uterus or the appropriate alchemical apparatus, it will turn into a monster. Quote, "Whatever the air touches is no longer seed, but a material of homunculus." And finally, the one you've probably been waiting for, and the one that initially drew me to this topic all those years ago, the alchemical homunculus. The artificial little person in the glass jar. This is where things get really weird. Let me read you an excerpt from one of Paracelsus's books. The process for creating a homunculus this way requires, and I quote, that the sperm of a man be putrefied by itself in a sealed cucurbit for 40 days with the highest degree of putrefaction in a horse's womb, or at least so long that it comes to life and moves itself and stirs, which is easily observed. After this time, it will look somewhat like a man, but transparent without a body. If, after this, it be fed wisely on the arcanum of human blood and be nourished for 40 weeks, and kept in the even temperature of a horse's womb, a living human child grows therefrom, with all its members like another child, which is born of a woman, but much smaller.
There is no such thing as human nature. There are simply observable patterns which we're entitled to interrupt or upgrade if they get in the way of our desire. So this is the moment of the sexual revolution. And to my eye, that moment of the colonization of women's bodies by capital has set off. It sets women constitutively at odds with our own bodies. That as the price of liberal emancipation, in ways which have been played out. In the book, I've unpacked three large-scale patterns of what I call the war on relationships, which is to say, though, it wages war on the relationships between men and women, which had previously been governed to a degree, and for better or for worse, by an understanding of asymmetry and of some interdependence. It sets off a war on the relationship between mothers and babies, because natural, normal fertility is interrupted and increasingly commodified. And downstream of that, you start to see the component parts of fertility being broken down and further commodified, for example, in the marketization of gametes, or the incursions of the fertility industry into the business of reproduction, and even the disassembly of gestation and motherhood through the commercial surrogacy industry.
C.S. Lewis's critique of scientific utopianism was at the heart of his novel That Hideous Strength, which tells the story of a conspiracy to transform England into a scientific dictatorship. The conspiracy is led by a government bureaucracy with the deceptively innocuous name of the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, or NICE.
I think that Hideous Strength and Huxley's Brave New World are the two greatest dystopias in our language in the 20th century.
The agenda of NICE in That Hideous Strength reads like a wish list drawn up by the era's leading scientific social reformers. It included sterilization of the unfit, selective breeding, biochemical conditioning, experimentation on both animals and criminals, and above all, truly scientific planning.
a scientific planning that is pretending to provide a new humanity that is doing away with traditional ethics, that is doing away with all traditional restraints.
Lewis depicts a world in that hideous strength in which nothing is sacred. Daniel Bell has told us that the essence of modernity is that nothing is sacred. In The Abolition of Man, and also in that hideous strength, we see the consequences of a world in which nothing is sacred, which includes the human person. The human person is not sacred. And when that happens, there are no distinctions between individuals, or humans and animals, or humans and vegetables, or humans and minerals. And we have the kind of thing we've had in the 20th century.
A group of scientists from the US and UK teaming up to create what is being called the world's first synthetic human embryos made without eggs or sperm. Some are calling it a scientific breakthrough. Others say it raises serious ethical and legal questions.
You flake it up. Alice, what happened to this guy when he backed out?
Maybe rubbing bacon.
That's it.
Coconuts, pineapple. The first thing that I'm going to do when I get back is to get some decent food.
I can dig it, man. I'm telling you, I've eaten birch fruit and this, but then I taste it better, you know what I'm saying?
The other one over there.
You pound down the stuff like this.
Listen, I'd rather be eating something else, but right now I'm thinking food.
You should know. You know what it's made of.
No, man. I don't want to talk about what it's made of. I'm eating this. What's the matter? The food ain't that bad, baby.
Eat your
What's wrong?
What's wrong?
What?
Hey,
what's the matter?
Oh, God!
No, no,
don't touch it! Don't touch it!
Whose embryo is this? If it's born in a quote unquote petri dish, for lack of a better term, whose embryo is it? Is it the states? Is it the research labs? Is it the people who donated the stem cells themselves? And then what happens if we do get past that 14-day period? At what point does it move from a living thing like a plant or an animal that's not human into the developmental of moral status and human rights? That's a whole nother set of questions. So the way that the law in each individual country, and to be clear, the race is on. This research is being done in China, it's being done in Israel, it's being done in the United States, it's being done in England, and more broadly in the UK. So I think there are lots of questions that need to be answered, or at least developed, before we can get to any of these rational conclusions.
Todd Furness.
Yeah, I agree. I suppose I found myself coming at it from the perspective of the things that you can't say from within that model. and rather direct experience, particularly of what it is about being a mother that you can't put into words from within the model. And I've theorized, I've borrowed from Heidegger elsewhere to frame this in terms of, of what you call the machine pool. It wants to turn everything into standing reserve. It wants to enclose everything. It started with the commons, and then it started patenting things, and now it's moving on to patenting people's bodies and genetic sequences. And but it wants to move things from being naturally occurring sort of biosemiotic, relationships with one another, to being inert resources that can be instrumentalized and ideally commodified and turned into something that can be used for something and sort of unmoored from its relational context. That's the basic movement: unmoor something from its relational context and then turn it into things which can be traded back and forth in a sort of liquid and limitless way.
Von lieblicher Gewalt. Es trübt. Es klärt sich also. Muss es werden. Ich sehe in zierlicher Gestalt ein artiges Männlein sich gebärden. Was wollen wir? Was will die Welt nun mehr? Denn das Geheimnis liegt am Tage. Gebt diesen Laute nur Gehör. Es wird zur Stimme. Zur Sprache.
Nun, Vetterchen, wie steht's? Es war kein Scherz? Komm, drücke mich recht zärtlich an dein Herz. Doch nicht zu fest, damit das Glas nicht springe. Das ist die Eigenschaft der Dinge. Natürlichem genügt das Weltall kaum. Was künstlich ist, verlangt geschlossenen Raum. Du aber.
Than a 120-volt battery and over 25,000 BTUs of body heat. Combined with a form of fusion, the machines had found all the energy they would ever need. There are fields now, endless fields, where human beings are no longer born. We are grown. For the longest time, I wouldn't believe it. And then I saw the fields with my own eyes. Watched them liquefy the dead so they could be fed intravenously to the living. And standing there, facing the pure, horrifying precision, I came to realize the obviousness of the truth. What is the Matrix?
Historically, started off by being concerned with men and women having equal legal rights. So things like access to professions and the ability for women to borrow money and do all this kind of stuff. And that was a really important battle of the 1960s and 70s in particular. And then the place it went from there, and I think that this is the error, was to, on a social and cultural level, to also aspire for sameness, which translates very often actually into just aspiring for women to be more like men, not actually generally wanting men to behave more like women. So for men to do more care work or, you know, whatever it might be, but for women to live as men do, to have working lives exactly like men's, to have sexual lives very much like men's. This is the argument I'm making in the book, that women should aspire to have more carefree sexual lives, where they can, you know, treat sex much more like a leisure activity, be much more casual about their sexual lives in every possible way, to have a more sort of masculine attitude towards sex and towards work and towards family and whatever. And as you say, the liberal individualist model in which we're these atomized frat boys who don't have relationships or responsibilities, or, you know, this is I think that the route that potentially goes down, where you end up rejecting so much of what has traditionally been women's lives, with women's work, that you end up actually with trying just desperately to be like men in every possible way.
You also have to be mindful of the incredibly complex nature of running one of these systems. You need a large number of extremely highly trained individuals and fairly vast resources to run this system. You would be much better spending money on things like education and access to all sorts of medical support and childcare and all of those other things that are fundamentally important.
I think every woman you ask would probably feel quite differently about that question. For me personally, I think it would be great. For a lot of women, it would be a heartbreaking loss. One of the things that's really important is that women play an essential role in the development of this technology, so that it doesn't become the patriarchy choosing what's going to happen to women's bodies. It has to be about individual choice.
So if that's the basic model, the problem with that from the perspective of a feminist and a mother is that everything that matters, everything that's important about being a mother is impossible. Is not visible within that model, because all of mothering is about pattern, and all of mothering is about repetition. You know, it's about showing up for your baby every day, in all the little ways that are important, because a baby's completely dependent on you, and all the things which are nice about it are impossible to frame in terms of the machine, because they can't be commodified. I mean, you know, it's easy to sort of wax sentimental about your baby's first laugh, but yeah, I think a lot of mothers will relate to the experience of getting to the end of the day and having had actually a lovely day, but then somebody asks them, "Oh, what did you do today?" And you can't say, you just can't sum it up, because you did stuff. And you were there, and it was in the moment, and just the day went by, and bits of it were probably really boring. But if you try and explain it to somebody from the perspective that's outside the relationship and that sort of dynamic business of kind of sustaining a tiny dependent person, if you like, with the energy and with your own body and your own way of being in the world, and you try and explain that sort of dynamic activity to somebody who isn't part of it and who isn't in those relationships with you, they'll just be like, well, that sounds pretty dull and repetitive.
Of Homunculus, which he said not only made him like God, but more powerful than God, because he created his from air, which, quote, was a thing more difficult than creating him of earth. In the 18th century, with the help of the Italian cleric Abbe Gelane, Count Johann Ferdinand von Kufstein was rumored to have created 10 homunculi with the ability to see the future. He kept them in glass containers at his Masonic lodge in Vienna, where dignitaries and people of renown would visit to see them. He called them the scrying ghosts. In Plato's Book of the Cow, which I mentioned a little earlier, the homunculus you're instructed to create is supposedly capable of prophecy, able to tell its creator of all things that are absent, whatever that means, and if you vivisect it, you can get your hands on all kinds of mystical components, including fluid that will allow you to walk on water.